Hey there, everyone. This is Oniika, and as I'm sure a lot of you know, the goal on my Patreon for tutorial videos has been reached, and I calculated it, and Patreon's a little weird with how it considers when a month is funded for a certain amount. So I believe technically June is the first time I need to do a video, but this is going to count as a May video. Sort of going to be a part zero, a little appetizer of how these videos are going to go to sort of get me used to doing them and, you know, see if people like it, see how comfortable I am with it, how good I am at articulating things. So without further ado, this is Oniika presents even. Oniika presents an art tutorial. I said a art tutorial thing. Oh, well. Let's go with it. My English is terrible anyway. Oniika presents an art tutorial thing, part 0, basic sketching. So, this is just going to be about exactly what it says. How do I start sketching in basic human form? I don't often stream it because I honestly go through so many sketches thinking of a pose and having to, like, try and talk to people while I'm thinking of a pose and look at references and have people be like, oh no, this pose is great. Or like, oh no, why did you, you know. It's a little difficult, a little taxing on me. So I don't often show that step. But today we're going to see how that step goes. And here we go. We have Photoshop. This is, as you all know, what I sketch in, what I draw in, everything. A rare look at my full screen, which is not very exciting. But what I always do over here is, you see I have the background layer, but I always make a new layer just in case, because I don't know anyone who uses the background layer. Sometimes I just turn it off, but sometimes the checkers get in the way. In terms of brushes, I actually have a sort of custom brush I use. I'm not sure how well this will show up on the video, so I'm just going to stamp it here. You can see it's like got sort of a texture to it. I like this because it gives it sort of a look and feel more of a pencil. And although the brush is like, I believe it's 200 pixels normally, you can see it kind of changes to give it a little more variation. I use it very small, usually 2 or 3 pixels, sometimes up to 6 if I'm doing a really loose sketch. But yeah, it's just what I'm comfortable with. You can sketch with whatever you want. A lot of people I see sort of sketch with a more smooth brush, and I'm not really good at that. I prefer having a bit of a rough texture, sort of a rough grain to my sketches, because it kind of emulates the feel of a paper sketch and emulates traditional art a little better, and it just feels a little more comfortable to me. But you know, it's entirely a taste thing. You could use the default brush, you could make your own brush. I have a bunch of brushes here. I have some custom brushes, you know. It's completely a comfort thing, but we'll get into brushes in a later video. This is just basic digital sketching. So I'm sure, you know, a lot of you guys kind of get the idea, but this is going to be a very basic video. So we're going to start with just a very basic pose, very basic human, bipedal organism, humanoid sort of thing. As the cliche goes, and I'm going to, this right here, if you see me draw something and then it disappears, that's me undoing. I have that on Control Z. Again, anyone acquainted with digital art, you're probably familiar with that. And if you have a tab, which by the way, I am using just a Wacom bamboo, and you can see, you know, it's fine. You know, it's fine for what I need it for. There's a lot of sort of not interesting stuff to look at right now, so let's just kind of jump in. As always, you kind of start with a head. The shape doesn't matter too much as long as you know it's a head. Although I'm going to start a little smaller so we can get it all on screen more. From there, I kind of draw a line that represents the collarbone. And as you can see, the placement's not always... You know, sometimes you have to redo it. It's fine. This is going to be very basic. Like, this is going to be starting one step up from a stick figure. I don't always do this, but sometimes if I'm really struggling with a basic pose, this helps me, and hopefully it'll help you too. So this, what do we have here? We have a circle and a line, It kind of looks like the number 10 sideways. And I'm going to be using a lot of basic shapes and a lot of basic geometric figures to describe what I'm doing. So this is basically where the head's going to be. This is the collarbone sort of area. About here will represent our waist, and here's going to be sort of the hip sort of area. And, you know, the length of the lines, it depends on what kind of body type you're doing. I'm going to go with something kind of, I'm going to try something sort of like, kind of an androgynous, not too masculine, not too feminine body type, just so I can get across what I'm trying to do. So the shoulders and hips are going to be about even, the waist is going to be a little thin. So from here we have these basic shapes, which this looks like nothing. This looks like utter nonsense. Well, a lot of people start with the spine, but I kind of do the spine after I have these because I like the idea of, and you know what, let's erase some of these, right? I like the idea of using these lines because you can like have a very, you know, like this would be a completely different pose from what we had before. This could be, end up being a very like upright standing sort of pose. And to me, visually, this helps me because I understand the spine being the sort of structure that makes up the human body. To me, I tend to see the shoulders and hips and where they're aligned being a little more of a visual cue. So again, like if you wanted, you know, this shoulder up, you could do it like that. And this depends on if you're going off of a reference or whatever, but we're not, so I'm just going to go with something more like, maybe a little more contrapposto. Alright, and now we move on to the spine, which to me is just sort of a line down from here to here, and then a line down kind of connecting the middle here and here. Now, again, it's still looking like nonsense. Believe me, we'll get there, and this is part of why I don't always sketch on stream, is because sometimes I do all these steps, other times I don't. It really depends on your comfort level and how... No, it's just your comfort level. It's how comfortable you are drawing, how comfortable you are drawing the pose, and how comfortable you are drawing the subject. So, if you have to start with nonsense like this, fine. If you start and you just draw, like, pretty much a finished face in 1 second, fine. If it varies from picture to picture, fine. But this is going to be essentially the upper body, the head down to the crotch. Now, the groin crotch area is sort of like, if you look at a human being, for the most part, proportionally, that's actually the center. Legs are a lot longer than a lot of people tend to realize, and a lot of that is because when you look at someone, you look either eye level at them, or if you're framing a movie or framing a comic panel or what have you, the upper body is more important. The legs make up a lot of volume, I guess you could say, a lot of verticality of the human body, but you tend to not... Oh, look, I have a graphic glitch displaying. Wonderful. You tend to not think they're as long as they are, but they actually are about the same distance from the top of the head to the bottom of the groin. So a thing you can do is actually, if you're not very confident with your proportions, you can make a new layer, as I just did, which let me actually show you over on the right side of the screen, you know, new layer. And what I sometimes do is I'll just draw a line, sort of, we'll make it a slightly straighter line, a line down, and somewhere in the center of it I'll make sort of a horizontal marking. And that's actually going to represent one of the legs. You can just pull it down here if you want. Again, this is just an optional thing you can do. This is a thing that I sometimes have to do. I don't always do this, but if you have to do something like this, you know, with digital sketching, it's absolutely fine. I feel like it's more important to make good art than it is to impress people with your process of it. So there's, you know, that's going to be this front leg, and then the sort of back leg, you know, we're going to make it, since they're kind of standing sort of contrapposto like this, and this is more, yeah, so the spine would actually be more shaped like this, but for a drawing that's not entirely, I don't find that necessary. You might. Again, that's totally fine. Art is art and not science. Everyone does it a little differently. For the other leg, and again, like, kind of going back, since they are standing sort of contrapposto, the other leg, I'm going to have angled back a bit, but this line here is still going to be about the same place. So now you're starting to see, that vaguely looks like a human. Not really. But this is where everything's going to start to come together. Is once you have these basic lines, this basic... And again, this is why art's great. People joke about not being able to draw like a stick figure. I mean, honestly, even I sometimes start with a stick figure like this. It's totally up to what you are comfortable with. But now we're going to sort of thicken them out a little bit. And how I do that is I love geometric shapes, and I especially love trapezoids. So, that's a little thicker than I want. But again, actually, you know what? Let's show this, right? So even with just these basic lines, depending on what sort of body type you are going for, this sort of trapezoid shape, and you can see it's a very, it's just trapezoid. Let me kind of draw it off this side here. It's a trapezoid shape. That's all it really is. I use this to sort of demonstrate the rib cage. Again, I'm not going to go too much into anatomy. I'm just going to go into basic drawing. But if you've ever seen a rib cage, it does have this sort of... It's more of an oval shape, but when you consider the collarbone and shoulders, it does sort of take a more geometric, wider at the top, tapers down a little bit at the bottom sort of shape. So we do this, and then we do a sort of inverted trapezoid here for the waist down to the hips, and depending on, if they're what kind of clothing they're going to have on, I tend to draw a little bit of a line down here to represent where the actual, like, pant seam, like groin hemline sort of thing is. And it does kind of look like tiny underwear. But again, it's just another trapezoid shape. So just all these trapezoids. From there, we can do more. Now, you can think of this as a triangle if you want. From this line here. I should be working in two colors, actually. Let me do that so I can point things out. You can think of it from like this line here down to this line as a triangle. Sometimes, again, I think of it as a trapezoid. Or I'll oftentimes think of it, too, as a sort of C sort of curve sort of thing. But again, it depends on the picture, depends on the body type. But we'll use another trapezoid. Same thing with this leg, another trapezoid. And I'm looking at this and I kind of messed up. But hey, that's what the eraser's for. And that's going to be the thigh, obviously. And now the calf is going to be... The calf, for me, I almost always draw as more of a triangle. If it's from the side, it's going to be a triangle. And I know, the leg doesn't disappear here into a little point, but we'll get to that in 1 second. This is more the side of the leg, so, again, to me, a triangle is a good representation of that. This being more the front of the leg, I tend to go with a really outstretched sort of hexagon. And you can see the 6 sides, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, just a hexagon. From here, going back to the side leg, I like to draw another triangle here, which represents how the ankle tapers down. And again, sometimes I'll do this in animation, sometimes I won't. This is just very, very basic idea of how it works. And foot from the side, I almost always just represent as a weird triangle. That's a little lumpy. A little Sonic shoe, if you've ever seen Sonic from the side, which I'm sure you have, because I'm sure most of my followers know how much I love the classic Sonic games. Kind of little Sonic shoe thing. In the front, I draw another sort of shallow hexagon. Now, we go sort of back up to the upper body. But you can see this is like, from all these goofy shapes, we're starting to get a basic human form. And it looks structured, it doesn't look flat too much. It doesn't look like lumpy and weird. It looks like a structured, it looks like there's like muscle and stuff here. And you notice I haven't drawn a single bit of anatomy. I haven't drawn a single muscle group, a single skeleton. This has all been lines and geometric shapes. Which, again, this being a very basic sort of look at this, that's how I want to keep it. I'll get into muscle groups and things like that in a later video if people want me to, but this is beginner's course here. So back up to the chest area, this sort of trapezoid, the upper trapezoid. That's how we'll call this piece of the anatomy, the upper trapezoid. What I do now is I look at where the neck sort of is. And again, depends on the body type, but if you want to think of the neck thickness about being here, then you're going to look at that and go, okay, well, I'm going to draw a line here and here to turn this trapezoid into another hexagon shape. And while I'm at it, these lines here, I'm actually going to extend those now into the bottom shape. And we're kind of like dividing this up into more and more geometric shapes. But these triangles are very, very important, because these triangles are essentially going to help a ton with laying out the arms. The chest, shoulders, and collarbone, they're actually one of my favorite parts to draw because there's so much movement going on. But because there's so much movement, and we don't need this trapezoid anymore. Goodbye, trapezoid. Because there's so much movement, it actually makes it very difficult for people to draw effectively, and this simplifies it a ton. So having these new triangular shapes, we're going to think about how to lay out the arms, and I do this in a variety of ways. For the purpose of this video, we're going to start with just sticks, just normal sticks, because again, this is very basic. So we're going to have sort of like a hand on the hip sort of thing, because that's sassy and sometimes is the only thing you can think to draw. And for this, although I don't want this to be completely, you know, I want there to be a little movement, we're going to have sort of a big cool, you know, raising the arms slightly. Let's change the angle a little bit, just slightly, and let's say he's giving a thumbs up, or she, or whatever it is. We're just drawing, you know, this is just human. This isn't even human. This is just biped. So biped here is giving a thumbs up. And from here, we're going to sort of bulk out the arms the same way we bulked out the legs. I tend to like working on the forearms first, only because there's no reason. There's no reason. I just like doing it. So again, we sort of think of it the same way we think of the calf here. Because arms and legs actually have very similar structure. And again, I'm actually going to thin this out a little bit. So this is another hexagon shape, and this is not quite a side view of the arm, which I would represent as a triangle. This is going to be another sort of hexagon shape, though, and it's not quite perfect. Again, it looks sort of, I guess, hexagon, because when I say hexagon, you tend to think of like a very even sort of thing. I guess what I'm trying to say more is sort of like a classic sort of Dracula coffin, if you want to think of it like that. Sort of outstretched hexagon. And that's an interesting way to think of drawing someone's calf as a Dracula coffin, but hey, you know, whatever helps you. I've heard people do really strange stuff with drawing. So we have this, and then we sort of just make these tapered shapes. Again, these become trapezoids, and these trapezoids represent the bicep. And that's kind of the most important part. And we have the basic shape of a human here. And it's taken way too long because I've tried to explain every step of a very rudimentary thing. But in any case, that's a basic shape of a human. Now, since this is digital art, we have a magic tool here that is going to blow your minds. We can flip this horizontally. And what that's going to do is show us, wow, you know, this isn't perfect. It's a little skewed a little bit. So I'm going to actually look at this, and me personally, I think it could work, but we're going to rotate it a little bit. Just a little bit. I think for our purposes, I'll also, and this is definitely showing you how to use these tools to your advantage. I feel like this leg's a little short, so you can grab it and pull it down a little bit. And this kind of editing with your digital sketches is very important because it allows you to very, very early on see what the faults are with your drawing, so you don't go and render this whole piece and then it turns out, oh no, the leg's too short. Which is why this is a basic sketching video, you know? I think that's pretty good. That'll work. So we're going to flip it back to normal. And we're going to work on making this look a little more like a human shape now. And the first step of that is we have the bottom, we have this midpoint of this hexagon. And I'm going to draw a line across like this. And this represents the chest, the bottom of the pectorals. And I'm also going to come here and go, okay, well, we have the spine in the back, but this isn't the character from the back. So I feel like we don't really need that anymore. What I feel like is going to help us out more is a line sort of, my phone went off, my apologies. A line sort of determining what the front planes of the body are like. So the chest, tends to go out a little bit. So we'll do a vertical line from here down to the bottom. This part of, this is now officially right here, is what most people consider to be the rib cage. Although the rib cage does encompass this entire area, most people when they talk about ribs will just talk about the area below the pectorals, and that tends to taper in. So we're going to have just a slight taper down like this. And then from the stomach, the sort of abdominal area, again, depends on the body type. This all depends on the body type you're going for, but these basic shapes will help you draw any body type, essentially. I'm just going to make it go almost, from the middle of this line to the middle of this line. So now that we have that, you might start to see, that does look a little more like a human. And if you want, you can kind of go in, I'm not sure what you would call this, but I'm not really going to call it cleaning the lines because it's not necessarily doing that. It's more so just making it so the lines are less messy. And I know that by definition, yes, that would be cleaning, but I feel like cleaning's a little too generous of a term. But anyway, now we have what essentially looks like a bipedal mammalian form. And from there, what I do is I bring this down to about, I'll bring it down to about 35% opacity. And I'll make a new layer, and this is where I start sketching for reals. So the head, I'm actually going to go down on this 35% layer again. Even though I made a new layer, I feel as though sometimes, like the undersketch, you can go back and work with that, and it's totally fine. So if they're looking towards, if they're looking this way, I'm going to think of it as, all right, well, this is going to be the vertical center of their head, and it's going to be the horizontal center, which is the eyeballs. And I tend to represent that as just, we get a circle here, and I don't really have a lot of structure to how I draw the head. I just kind of think of it as, yeah, it's a circle, and then there's like a jaw attached to it. And that's kind of it. But that'll be, that'll be enough for me to understand how that's a head. Now we go back up to our new layer, and this is where things get really fun, and also, for me, get a lot faster. And this is not going to be super clean, and this is not going to go too in-depth, but I am going to show how I do lay out the basic muscle groups with essentially not drawing a single muscle at all. So we have the center of the collarbone. And what I do here for this shape is I kind of, draw a line like this, which will represent the sort of veins you get in the neck. And I do, it's, again, very basic shapes. Sort of taper this line down here a little bit. Now, for the chest and armpit area, we have this sort of crazy nonsense going on here with these two triangles in this line. Since this arm is slightly raised, there's a little bit of, if you raise up your arm and look at it, there's a little bit of, it's not quite a muscle, but it's like, it's the armpit. That's all you can think of it as. In the most basic terms, it's the armpit. And it does sort of stretch. So I think of it as, you go from like the center of this triangle down to a little bit above where the triangle ends. It's kind of arbitrary. Just sort of draw a line down here. And what you do is essentially, this is what I would consider cleaning it up. I don't have a whole lot of hot tips here for you. Just that you kind of get rid of the geometricness of it and kind of smooth it out a little bit. You know, use more curves. And some people, myself included, sometimes I'll just start at this face. Sometimes I won't mess with the stickman thing at all. But sometimes I need it. And maybe it's just I have an off day. Maybe it's just, you know, I need to warm up drawing. Maybe it's a weird pose. It's totally up to you. I've seen some people that when they draw a face will go and draw... I'm not going to get into it too much. I might demonstrate it in a later video, but they'll draw every single line and plane of the face you could imagine, like to the point that when they're done the face, it looks like a 3D model wireframe of a face. And then they'll go in and erase all those lines and get rid of a ton of those details. And it looks like a perfectly good face, but to me I think like, wow, you put a lot of work that you're just getting rid of. But I digress. Move down to the rib cage area, and again, since this is not too, this is a very average body type, we're just going to imply the ribs are here with a little, again, a C shape. Moving down into the hip. See, this is important too. The rib cage, this is where some people will draw a rib cage, but I imply the rib cage later on in the sketch by drawing this line and by having a line kind of peek in here a little bit. And also do that slightly on this side, but it doesn't really go in as much as it goes, tapers in slightly, and then goes sort of, you know, back out a little bit. Little bit. This pose doesn't really show it off very well, but anyway, draw a line down here, kind of draw the outside. Draw the outside. Here we just sort of, again, we're essentially getting rid of a ton of lines. And now, there's a lot that can go on in the abdominal area. A lot of times I'll just kind of have like a navel and like a little, you know, hip bone. Sometimes if I want to imply a little more structure, a little more like, not quite a six-pack, obviously, but like, you know, a little more structured muscle, I'll have a line in like that. Another thing about the navel, navels on people are completely random. There's no determined place that it's always going to be. I tend to draw it around here, which is not quite the thinnest section. It's right below the thinnest section. Some people have their navel lower. It depends on your body type, it depends on genetics, it depends on all sorts of factors. So just find whatever you find is aesthetically pleasing enough. So if I'm just drawing, like, you know, that could be enough detail for like whatever I'm going to do. I might be putting clothes on it, I might not. This is all just basic steps. Now if you're going to draw something with more muscles, this is where the lower sketch is going to help a lot. So we already have these kind of lines here, and that's sort of like, if you look, if I draw this on top, you sort of get like a swimsuit sort of thing, you know? Sort of get like a Cammy style from Street Fighter swimsuit. But that's actually very helpful, because if you want to draw, say, abs, what I tend to do is a little under the pectorals, I draw a line here, draw a line connecting about here to here, and again we get this sort of coffin shape. And I'm not going to go too much into how abs look like, but that's the basic structure of it for me. So how would I do this? It doesn't really work with this type of body for me, but this is essentially the shape that you'd start to, we can mess with it a bit. The shape I'd start to mess with. And, trying to think of it in a way that would make sense. But I could honestly just draw that, and you would start to see where, you know, you'd start to fill in details there. And that's a very stylistic thing, and that's a very, it's very determined on how muscular you want to draw your characters. When I draw male characters, I tend to draw them very, very muscular, and I tend to draw them, well, I tend to draw muscular male characters very muscular. And what I'll tend to do is, I'll make a new layer here to demonstrate this. I'll exaggerate the ribcage sort of area, and I'll, like, you know, just draw in more. I just kind of pile lines on top of lines. That's the only way I can describe it. It's the more lines are the more muscles, and I do tend to draw them as like a, again, more like weird tapered shapes, and you know, that'll be a whole nother video. Like, actual muscle structure will be a whole nother video, because I'm thinking of it now, and I'm no anatomical expert, but even I could talk about that for hours. So we'll not worry about that now. We'll just worry about getting down just the basic ideas of where stuff goes without getting too much into anatomy. So down to the legs, and the legs, again, are going to be very simple. The knees, kind of, on this leg, I'll do the knee first. It kind of just goes out a little bit. But this is where the curve and sort of like C shape I was talking about comes from. You, for the legs, really, really need to keep this in mind. It's always sort of, see, there's like an outward curve like this, and then an inward curve like this. And then the knee becomes an outward curve, and right below that is an inward curve, and behind that is an outward curve that gets to this point and goes into an inward curve. And you can see it's like, whoa, that looks like a leg. Same thing here. Outward curve, goes into a slight inward curve, outward curve, and it's a very, very tiny inward curve at the ankle. And again, this is just basic nonsense here. For the knee, I kind of just draw. I don't have too much going on for the knees. Some people, like, I feel like if you put too many lines into a knee, it gets a little weird to me. It gets a little too detailed. But it depends on your art style. Depends on what you want to go with. Feet are a whole shenanigan. But if we're just making something that we're going to draw clothes over, that we're going to draw shoes over, all you really need to do is just understand. Let me go back so I can actually explain what I'm doing. Heel kind of goes out. The sort of arch of the foot occurs. You know, you just take it from a triangle and you kind of make it more. I tend to think of a shoe more than an actual foot when I draw, because usually I'm drawing a shoe and not a bare foot. But even still, the basic, I'm drawing this terribly, just by the way, the basic shape of it really helps me. And again, this is just very basic ideas of sketching. This is essentially my version of, you know, that looks a little, that's not really descriptive here. So if you want, you can do, like, you know, sort of lines. Again, we'll use Sonic shoes as an example, because Sonic shoes are actually kind of genius in that the stripe on them tells you a sort of curve that the foot goes at. So from the front, if you have this sort of Sonic stripe and you know it arches up, you know that this is a sort of part of the foot that follows this this shape, and then it doesn't just go straight down into a triangle. It goes out a little more of an obtuse angle. And weird things like that can be helpful, you know? And that's kind of why I'm doing this. This is, if you've ever seen those really basic how to draw books, this is kind of my equivalent of that, of like the very basic, like, how the heck do you draw a thing? And this is no anatomical masterpiece. This is no, you know, this is just how I would get the basics of it started. Now onto the arms. The bicep again kind of curves out. Here it's going to kind of curve in. Again, you just kind of find tricep. You're going to go in a little bit, then go out, and that's kind of weird. I'm going to fix that. I had that line extending too far inward. It's really, really basic. Again, this is all just super, super, super basics. This, depending on how much you want to exaggerate it, and again, if I ever do something on actual anatomy and muscles, I'll talk more about this, but this is, as I was saying, if you ever get those little how to draw books, how to draw the Marvel way, how to draw, like, you know, I'm sure you've seen those little kid stuff aimed at little kids. That's kind of what this is, where it's like it doesn't want to overwhelm you with the ideas of anatomy and the ideas of what's there, and, like, you know, it just kind of wants to get you started at the concept of drawing. And in my opinion, that's more important than learning all sorts of anatomy first. It's just learning the concepts of, like, where things go. Although here, I do kind of like to exaggerate, or at least point out to myself where the bicep is going to be. And, you know, you can erase that. It doesn't need to be super, super great. Hands are a whole structure all on their own. I'm not going to get into it too much right now. I'm just going to say, see that? That's super great. That's how I line up a hand half the time. It's nonsense. It's utter nonsense. It's completely, like, just nothing. This hand, again, is, like, it's all just shapes, and it's just trying not to think too hard and trying not to overstress yourself is a lot of what I find is difficult with starting with drawing, and is difficult with if you don't have much confidence in your ability. And you can see I'm going back here and I'm fixing stuff up. And this is actually a little more difficult for me because, number one, I'm not used to talking while I'm putting down these lines and explaining them. But number two, I wouldn't use all these steps for getting to this point. But when I'm trying to articulate it, you know, I want people to understand how you can use these steps to get to this point. And the head is going to be, it's kind of, wow, kinda. I'm getting an accent there. I mean, I'm from Jersey, but hey, you know, I don't talk like that all the time. Anyway, looking at this head, I actually do want to change its position ever so slightly. Just ever so slightly. And for sort of laying out what's going to happen here, I am going to draw a little more structure in the head, only because faces might be a little hard for people, and I'll just talk about very basically how I lay it out. So we have a basic head shape here. What I tend to think of is, you know, you have this little plus head man, and a lot of people get to that point and they don't know what to do with it. They think the little plus head man is enough. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. So what I do with this little plus head man is I make another line above this which represents where the brow is going to be. And this is, you know, this is the middle of the eyes. And I think of the bottom of the circle is somewhere of, like, the upper lip area. Somewhere like the area between the nose and the lip. So you can think of it as like kind of a shape like that, and the mouth somewhere there. And that's basically this is very, very basic idea of it. The ear would be in this sort of area. And now that's probably not the nose shape you're going to go for. This is probably not the head you're going to draw. But when you have this, right, we're going to just copy it onto a new layer, and we're going to turn off the old sketch. When you have this, you can take it, and you can then go, and I'm going to zoom in even further here. I should be drawing this larger, but I'm not. Turn my brush down a little bit. You can take this sort of shape and draw on top of it in a way that's like, okay, I'm going to draw more like, you know, anime sort of shaped head, as I tend to do. You make it a little, having difficulties here. I'm having difficulties because I don't normally draw this much structure. Give me a few seconds. Give me a few seconds. Again, this is why I tend not to stream too much this part, because it's very strange. But with these basic shapes, you know, you can start to draw faces. Everyone stylizes faces in their own way. What I would do is, from here I have this. I tend to only draw like the bottom of the nose, so I'd kind of get like an idea of like, okay, I draw this part of the nose. Well, I'd draw it more like that if I was kind of sketching it out. Nostril around here. And now here's a funny thing I do sometimes when I lay out faces. This is a very Japanese thing right here, and comes from an Idolmaster meme. There's a concept of a little joke character version of Haruka called either Noano or Nonowa, and that is because it is made of oh, hold on, and then like I forget which way it goes, but it's like a wa shape. And if you're familiar with animes and stuff, you can look at this and you can actually think of like, hey, you know, if I draw a little more nonsense in here, you know what I mean? Start to get this little blushies, huh? See what I'm getting at? Starts to look like a little anime person. Little anime peeps right there. And just draw like a big, goofy, you know, pudgy head on him. But as goofy as that is, and as dumb as that meme is, that sometimes does help me. So I can look at this face, and you can see that actually looks better than what I was doing here with all this structure. So sometimes I will actually think of these shapes and think of putting them in between this sort of structure I have. You know, you get the no, and the wa. And that actually is very helpful. And there's a lot of weirdness to how I draw. Like, you know, there's a lot of, again, there's like the Sonic shoes, there's the hexagons, and now we have a weird little Japanese emoticon face. But, again, this is sort of, you know, to think of like, what sort of things can you, rather than follow my instructions and rather than follow the exact instructions you might find in a book, it's more important, and I guess this is what this video sort of is going to come together and talk about, is it's more important to find your own methods. And although this is not a beautiful piece of artwork by any means, this is not a fantastic, amazing, artistic masterpiece, but maybe this is better than you think you can do normally. Maybe you look at this and you go, you know, wow, I never would have thought of it that way. You can really simplify how to draw a sort of 3D structure to a body. And honestly, getting into this, right, with what we have here, if you're trying to think about how do I draw in like a 3D space, how do I draw in a structured sort of environment, we can make a new layer and we can use just a very thick black brush, you know, start to draw some shadow under the neck here, little bit on the face, kind of will go in here. I tend to not draw too much shadow on the face personally, but if you look at the lines we have underneath and use those as sort of like a marker, you can start to think of where the light would actually fall on this structure. And you can you know, just sort of follow these lines and think of like the depth of things again, like the rib cage. Do we have the rib cage going out here? Do we have the rib cage, like, you know, is there more space between the ribs? You know, whatever you want to think of it as. Sort of following these lines more and more. Let's make this brush a little bigger just to make this go by a little faster. And you noticed I didn't define a light source. I didn't think about a light source here. I'm just thinking about the shapes that I have. And you start to do, you know, a little bit more of this. And I use actually a light source that is very interesting. It's sort of like, some people represent it as a sun coming down like that. Some people, you know, will have like, oh, I put the sun here. I put the sun up here. I tend to draw like an oval sun, like you're shining a big spotlight on the front of someone. And that's just because I feel like that looks better as a light source. Maybe you don't. That's totally fine. Again, art is about self-discovery, I feel. Art is absolutely about self-discovery and figuring out the type of art you want to draw and the way you want to draw. And you might not know that yet. You might not know that for the next, 50 years. But I don't think I entirely know it yet. But hey, it's a journey more than a destination, much like a lot of facets of life. But that's a bit deep. It's a bit deep for what this is. Just sort of drawing, some shadows in. And if you sort of lower that opacity, you're starting to be like, wow, hey, look, this is now usable. To me, although this is not a good piece of art necessarily, this has gotten to a usable equation of where now I can get rid of, so, we have the early sort of stickman structure. We have the modified head. We can honestly get rid of those now. And from here, from this is where I would start to sketch. In terms of making it an actual character. Which, this is what's, people love to put details, people love to come up with designs, but coming up with something you can actually draw on top of is the difficult part. And, through this goofy nonsense, we've achieved that now. And it's not a super great piece of artwork, in terms of, you're not going to see this hanging in a museum, especially not with this goofy emoticon face over here. But, had to make sure I was actually recording this. Probably should have checked that earlier. But this could be the very beginning of one of the best pieces of art you'll ever make. And it might not be, but these basic tools might get you to a point where you understand how to make better art. And these are basically the steps I take. And it goes a lot faster usually because I don't have to explain it. And oftentimes I will skip steps and I will, if not skip them, sort of like modify them in a way. But at the very least, if you think you have no idea how to draw, maybe, hopefully this will be helpful and hopefully it'll give you insight a bit into how I draw and how I lay out the basic structure for things. So, thinking about it, there's a lot more I would like to talk about, but I think for one video, this is more than enough. I think for one video, this will definitely, or at least hopefully, help people out and sort of get them started in understanding how you would draw something that is essentially a completed piece of artwork. And looking at this, I think I want to rotate them forward a little bit more even. But yeah, there you go. That is a basic bipedal humanoid shape, how I get to it, and more importantly, how I get to it without worrying too much about anatomical structure and muscle groups and knowing the names of muscles and the stuff that you look at and tends to bog you down and overwhelm you when you don't understand it. And I feel like this, getting to this level where you feel comfortable with being like, hey, that looks like a human, is a lot more important and a lot more beneficial than just memorizing every single muscle group. And real quick, let's just show how this works again. So if I do an above angle, right, it's the same steps, and I'm going to do this a little faster. Here's a circle for the head. This is going to be an above angle. This is a camera sort of pointing down, bird's eye view sort of thing. So I know the face is going to be more of an angle like this. The top of the head would be more in this sort of structure. Collarbone would be about, I'm going to say about here. Since it is a bird's eye view, the waist is going to be appear to be a lot shorter, as is the groin. And we're going to sort of now, I'm going to start turning these into trapezoids right now. And then I think of it as, again, the legs become a lot shorter. Everything becomes sort of shortened from this bird's eye view. And some people will draw like a whole like perspective layout for this, right? And I'll keep that here. I'll actually keep that here. I was going to erase it, but I'll keep it here. I don't really do that. I just think of it like this. And I think, okay, well, since this is above, you're going to see a little bit of their back. And now, again, these triangles that are going to make up the shoulders, they become even more important. And again, look, here's where I'm skipping drawing lines, and I'm just going to a shape, because now I know the shape of an arm from this angle. And I know how I want it to look. So you can do it like that. And now I'm going to round this out a little more, because even though these are flat shapes, the human body is not necessarily flat. So I'm going to round it out a little bit. And you can see now how, and see, that's usually how quickly I sketch, because I don't have to describe anything. So this could be a layout for like a comic panel of, you know, let's say we want to keep this here. This could be someone coming through a door making like a dramatic entrance, you know? Maybe, you know, oh, the door's like bursting open. You know, like, oh, they just burst in. They're like, what's up? I'm here to strike posterior with my foot and chew delicious candy. And my supply of candy has been depleted. You know, could be a thing like that. But, you know, let's start with that. And if we do want to make it a sort of tough guy, you know, we'd use these sort of lines that we have. And we think, okay, like a tough guy, he's got big muscles. You know, he's got these outward. You know, again, here's the tricep that goes out. The forearms kind of, you know, go like this. And you're getting into the sort of the abs, the abdominal region. Again, it follows this same. These are just all the same shapes I showed you before. And here's the little, you know, the little swimsuit thing I pointed out. That is always where I place the abs. And, you know, he's probably going to have pants on. Let's just assume, you know, shirts are optional, but you usually need pants in most scenarios. But you can see, like, look at this. This now, with just these same basic shapes and these same basic lines, I've now created a decent layout for something that could be, we'll just gesture in some pants here. Something that could be a comic panel, something that could be a storyboard, even for something. And this level of art, though not necessarily perfect, though not necessarily something you might, you might not show it to your mom and ask her to hang it on the fridge, which I often do. But if you're working with someone, say on a project, or you know, you want to get this idea across to someone, using just the basic skills we talked about in this video, you'll be able to get the idea across of just, you know, how a person basically stands there. And like if you want to have a low angle, right? We're going to draw the head like this. A low angle, everything kind of goes a little higher. So here's the collarbone, and I'm going to bow this out more. Instead of just being a line, I'm going to bow it out a little bit. Same thing, here's the waist, and here's the sort of hips. And again, we kind of structure it out. And I'm going to use big muscles again, just because it's easier to demonstrate this stuff, I feel. So now, with this, you can start to see how we have, like, he's going a big like Super Saiyan sort of pose, you know, like he's Super Saiyan Broly powering up. And you can see, like, this, I'm not drawing the sticks here, I'm just drawing very loose shapes. That actually looks really weird. Hold on, let me fix that. And look, sometimes you make mistakes, sometimes you have to fix them. But this right here, it's very abstract, you know, but this is enough to get across, like, this is not a character, but this is a pose. And this is a pose that can help you. And this is a pose that can help, you know, other people try and get across, like, oh, here's how I want this, you know, here's how I want this to look, or like, you know, you start to actually have now, like, oh yeah, look at that. That's a dude powering up. You know? He's getting his big DBZ hair. But, and again, this is all with just very basic shapes and how to apply them quickly and how to sort of lay out a rough sketch for yourself. So I think that covers enough for one video. Originally, I planned to make the first video on my inking technique. I still plan to make a video on that, but I feel as though sketching is a good, you know, this is a video 0, so next video might be about inking, but if you have any feedback, I might make a video more about sketching or anatomy or general getting comfortable with drawing even. I might even make something about how to properly reference a pose, or at least how I reference poses. Just, you know, as the cliche goes, let me know what you think in the comments below. And again, a big thank you to all my patrons for making this happen and for supporting me and continuing to support me and Fearless Night and all my fun endeavors. And yeah, I'll listen to what you guys have to say, and I'll base the content of the next video, the June video, although it is technically June right now. I'll base the June video on that feedback. So again, thank you everyone, and I'll see you next time.